Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Saving Resources in an Economic Downturn. Can Tech Replace an MDR? Sponsored by Intezer. My name is Jennifer Lynn of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Jake Williams, SANS Senior Instructor, and Shaul Holtzman, Senior Sales Engineer, Intezer. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to our presenters.
Hey, thanks so much, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. Before we get started with the agenda, I want to give Shaul a chance to introduce himself. This is not our first rodeo together. He is a fantastic presenter, has a ton of insight from his work at Intezer. Shaul, can you introduce yourself a little bit and give the audience a little bit of your background so they know where you're coming from?
Of course, and thank you very much, Jake and Jennifer, for hosting the webinar. Yeah, so my name is Shaul, as was said. I'm in charge of sales engineering at Intezer for the past 4 years. I have background in incident response, malware analysis, forensics, and as part of my job at Intezer, we speak mostly with SOC and incident response teams, security operations, and working, of course, to automate that as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked a lot in the past. We're going to talk a lot today as well, right, about how, again, we really have a talent gap in the industry today in automation, right? So many people are like, the automation will like solve, we won't need as many people. And it's like, well, maybe, right? But what we're really trying to do is make the people we have better. And that's one of the things that I love about the Intezer approach is it's level up your people, right? And make them that much better, right? And so you want to speak a little bit to that as we get going?
Yeah, exactly. I always find it a bit cringy when you talk about automation, because I think that there's no real replacement for people. And I don't think that should be the goal. Like, people need jobs as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when they spend less time on meaningless tasks that don't really utilize their skill, then they can actually do something that's proactive and properly protecting the organization.
Right. That's what we want to do here. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, is getting rid of the repetition, right? And being able to level those folks up, right? So that, more junior analysts can make more senior analyst type decisions. And then separately, you're freeing up your senior analysts to stop doing the repetitive stuff, right? And have them really dive deep, right? Where we need them, honestly, right? So getting started today here, just overall agenda, we're going to talk about the lay of the land when it comes to security operations teams. I want to talk about haves and have-nots, right? And so, this is a topic that comes up a bit, and if you spend any time in the information security scene, right, you're going to hear people talk about where they're like, oh, well, this is how it's done. And it's like, time out, right? Like, I know you read about this stuff, and I see Shaul's laughing here, right? Like, you read about this stuff in a book someplace, right? And so there's an ideal of maybe with limitless budget that none of us have, by the way, how you might go out and do things. And then there's the reality, right? So if you're a Fortune 5, this webcast, I mean, not saying that this product won't make you better too, but this is not for you, right? This is for the everybody else who's trying to figure out, how are we going to staff? How are we dealing with, some of our staffing issues? One of which is key man risk, right? If you're not familiar with this term, you probably are familiar with the condition, just not the term. We'll discuss that a bit as well. We'll talk about why some teams outsource and others don't. And then we'll talk a little about MDR market challenges, and then close it out with Shaul giving a demo of the Intezer product, and how that is, and show very tangibly how that's helping security operations teams. We're going to back and forth a little bit here and be super conversational. So if you have questions, please drop them into the chat. Into the Q&A window, that one. But drop them into the Q&A window. Me and Shaul will answer those as we move through the deck. We're going to keep it super conversational today. So no death by PowerPoint. So next slide. So as we talk about security operations teams, right, we have significant challenges aligning monitoring costs with value. And again, if you sit in, a $100 billion revenue e-commerce, company, you probably don't have any challenges aligning monitoring costs with value. If on the other hand, right, online is not your main component. You're a manufacturing organization, you're an insurance organization, you're like an insurance broker, you name it, right? You may have challenges convincing, right, your stakeholders that, well, how much monitoring is really enough, and they struggle with this. Or you ask them, how much do you want? Everybody wants 24/7, and then they see the price tag, and this leaves in-house teams struggling to align adequate coverage. And buddy, as a CISO, and often these are organizations that don't have a formal CISO, but as the cybersecurity person, the director, as it were, of cybersecurity in an org, I never want somebody to come back and be like, okay, Jake, here's the deal, right? You're not getting 24/7. You've got this much budget. Go make it happen. Make sure that it's good enough, though. And I'm like, what am I going to do here, right? Shaul, I know you work with a lot of teams here. Talk to me a little bit about how you see this kind of conversation unfolding in real life.
Yeah, so one of the first questions I ask clients or potential clients, users of the system, is how is the SOC or the monitoring is structured. And it's rare that people have 24/7 internal monitoring. Even with rather large companies, you'd be surprised that the teams are quite small, and a lot of the day-to-day monitoring is done outside of the organization. Sometimes, they manage it during the day and they outsource it during the night. So it's very difficult to maintain, the quality of the process and the consistency of the security operations process, because different people do it in different times with different focus points.
I was actually gonna bring that up here, right, as kind of a pitch back, but I'm so glad you already kind of hit that a little bit, right? You said the word, and then they manage it, during the day, and it's been my experience, they're not really managing it during the day, right? They're kind of like, oh, we've got an analyst who comes in, right? I see one of two models kind of, and I'm interested in your take on this, what you've seen, but when they have that partially outsourced model, I see a lot of folks where you have either the daytime folks, right, that are typically or business hour folks, not just daytime, right, but normal business hour folks, the Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, right. They typically either are the ones that are super aggressive on monitoring. I say super aggressive compared to maybe my outsourcers who are just kind of like pitching stuff across the wall. SON alarm, handle that tomorrow, handle it tomorrow, right? And then separately, I see some where the in-house folks are getting pulled in 8 different directions, right, during the day. And while we want to think that they're really answering all those alarms and that, on paper, that's their job, we end up not seeing that. Have you observed that at all? And can you speak a little bit to that if you have?
Yeah, of course. And even more than that, like it's never a full solution. Even if you have outsourcing during the night, let's say, you get escalations in the morning. It's not like that you finish, or your outsourced service finishes the job. They do tier 1. You can also add tier 3 to that, but that's of course an entire different thing. So in the end, it also doesn't really reduce the work, and there's no real incentive of finishing the investigation on the outsource side. They triage the alert, but in the end, you need to handle it. Something else that I noticed regarding that is that when this is the flow, nothing really is investigated till the end. So it's mostly done based on putting out the fire model. So you have an incident, it's escalated, reformat the machine. There's no need to collect threat intelligence, just clean it up and go on to the next one.
By the way, I want to be very, very clear here. That's not an actual recommendation, right? To don't investigate and just move on to the next one after you format the drive. That was sarcasm. That's not an actual recommendation for a way to handle stuff. But that was so deadpan. I wanted to make sure that the audience understood.
Sorry, I have that tendency.
Yeah. No, but so something that we do run up against here too. I tell folks, because you talked about that not being a full solution. I agree with you. Couldn't agree more. I mean, I've owned, an MSSP in the past, right? Running MDR service. And I can tell you firsthand, right? It can't be a full solution unless we have staff augmentation effectively, right? Because we don't know internally your systems. We don't have the authority, right, to make, some breaking changes potentially, right? Or taking a system offline. So a lot of it ends up being, I most often would analogize it to really to an answering service, 24/7 answering service for a doctor's office, right?
Mm.
So, the phone is gonna, the alarm doesn't go unanswered. Someone's there to see it, right? And if I declare based on, that answering service has a script, and if they declare it to be an emergency based on that script, they're going to route you to the emergency room, or they're going to call that doctor at home and wake them up, right? But everything else, right, is kind of like triage, like, okay, well, drink plenty of fluids and then come in tomorrow at 9, right? Which is what you end up seeing a lot with, kind of, you pointed out, right? You're kind of delaying that or batching those for the next morning.
Yeah.
Right?
Or,
Yeah.
do a lot of exercise.
Yes.
That's a lot of things you need to do yourself, but
Right.
you get that recommendation.
Definitely. So let's go up to the next slide. So quickly here, I want to talk about the haves and have-nots. This is something that me and Shaul were talking about, as we talked about kind of like the flow for the webinar. And we thought that it was really important to get this out here, right? Because I have a lot of, no secret that there's a huge talent gap in the industry, right? We are in need of a lot of people. And what that means practically, and this is not a new phenomenon, right? What this means practically is there are a lot of people that are very, very junior in cybersecurity right now. We have this huge base of people with only like 1 to 2 years of experience. That's great, right? I mean, like, I love that we're getting a lot of people into the industry. But so many of them, went through a boot camp or took some cybersecurity, degree course. And so what they've been presented with is, this is the way it's supposed to be, right? So they've been presented with the ideal of how security operations could work, not how it really does work in practice, right? And so they end up, I talked to a lot of folks who end up in their first cybersecurity position. They're like, they're doing it all wrong. I'm like, no, they're doing it reality, right? So what you're seeing is reality. It's not, this is, I mean, there's some people that are doing it wrong, but the reality is that, again, most folks are in that have-not kind of moment. Most of us do have challenges with recruiting, retention, budget. That's true for operational and capital expenditures, OpEx and CapEx. The quote unquote have-nots, right? They have to work with significant constraints, balancing that cost and value. And Shaul, I don't know if there's anything you want to contribute here, but go ahead, man.
Yeah, so I see so many organizations, of course, on the have-not side, that try to do a lot of work on their own, including, building their own sandbox environment, creating their own tools, using open source tools, which is excellent. But usually the problem is that you don't have support, and these solutions are not connected. And not necessarily consistent. So there's a lot of manual work to reach the same goal as a larger company with a larger budget can get with 2-3 huge solutions that cover, the entire stack.
I want to challenge you on that, right?
Yeah.
Only because you said to achieve the same solution, right? Implying that they are actually achieving the same solution or the same, the same effect. And I would challenge and say that I've never seen that occur, right? What I'm seeing is, but I do love the point that a lot of the have-nots try to go to these open source solutions, right? And I'm not saying open source is bad. I love it. My favorite, and I don't remember who I stole this quote from. It's definitely not an original. It's open source is only free if your time has no value, right? And so that's something that I see a lot of these smaller security teams do. And unfortunately, it's actually counterproductive, right? A lot of these teams are like, look, we innovated and we saved all this, we saved all this money by deploying this and configuring and working out this open source solution. And I'll tell you that I've seen a lot of those be really, really suboptimal. In fact, the opposite, of actually improving security, because they're taking all this time. Bear in mind, if you don't have budget for tooling, that tooling is a rounding error compared to people in most cases, right? And so you probably don't really have the people to be dedicating to this. You brought up support. You don't have any of that, right? And so what I end up seeing here is a lot of folks who are like, hey, Jake, see, we did all this work with this elk stack and we've got that built out and we're, this, I mean, you name it, right? And don't get me wrong, again, I love doing a lot of this work, but then I ask, okay, well, are you monitoring it? And oh yeah, and I got about 2 hours a day to put into this. And I'm like, exactly, right? Like, I need your gray matter. I need your skills, right? The things I can't automate, right? I need you pushing on that. And honestly, there is obviously a balance between tooling and human here, but oftentimes these have-nots pushing to the free and open source solutions. Oh my gosh, right? It ends up being hugely counterproductive. So please.
Yeah, usually the next thing people say is that, we've built this, and that, but it's not really, the timing doesn't really match up, and the results don't as well. That's why they're looking for additions to that. Even the larger organizations who have, the state-of-the-art tools need to put in work for integration, automation, etc. So if you don't even have that to begin with, of course, that it becomes nearly impossible.
Definitely, definitely. And if we can forward up here, I want to talk about something very specific that we bump into a lot on the next slide here with the with a lot of our have-nots, and that's key man risk. And so anybody can suffer from key man risk, right? But smaller security teams are particularly vulnerable to this. Basically, key man risk means that even though you have an operation that today is running okay, it only does so because of one or a very few key individuals. Then you see this in some, in some businesses, right? Like if you've got a, and I'm sure we could all name a couple of businesses out there, right? That are like underpinned by, we're not going to on the webcast here, but they're underpinned by like, kind of one of those larger than life kind of folks, right? And then you look around, it's like, if that person became ill, died, unavailable, whatever, what happens to the company, right? This is such a common thing that, no joke, like there's actually insurance called key man insurance, right? That businesses take out. There's no such thing, unfortunately, as far as I'm aware of key man cybersecurity team insurance, right? So I don't even know what that would look like. But I do bump into this where these businesses, by luck, serendipity, what have you, some of these smaller organizations are like, we're limping along. I want to be like super clear here. If you're suffering from key man risk, we're like losing that one person, collapses the team, you're not doing well. Right? People are like, no, we're doing fine today. We're doing well. And I'm like, you're not. You have this outsized risk around this one person, right? So you're not doing well. You are limping along, right? In spite of, right, kind of thing, as opposed to, I have to reframe that. But again, smaller teams, they are very much more likely, just because they have smaller numbers in the first place, right? Just law of numbers here. They are very likely to be dependent on one, usually it's one, person, than a much larger security team, right? If you're Walmart and you have, I don't even know how many people Walmart has, but let's call it hundreds of people on their cybersecurity team, I'm sure they've got some people that would hurt to lose, but it ain't the same kind of situation here. And Shaul, excuse me, I know you've seen this before, particularly talking to smaller security teams. Got any war stories here?
Yeah, it makes complete sense, and I've seen teams collapse with people leaving, and it happens very often. People move around, but it also is, unmanageable, because if you have that key person who holds most of the knowledge, they don't have the time or resources to document and to teach and train the team, so to create that organizational memory. They just need to get things done, with the time they have.
Yeah. I was in an exec coaching seminar yesterday, right? And they talked about the whole, you've got the kind of that box, and I forget the name of the box here, right? But it's the quadrant, right? Where it's like stuff that's important and stuff that's critical, right? And so you want to be working on important things that are not critical right now, right? And so these people that are on the key man side, they are constantly in this upper right section where they're working on important things that are time critical right this second. And we call that in the industry putting out fires, right? That's what they're doing. They're moving from fire to fire to fire. By the way, folks, if you have somebody in your in your team that you look around and you're like, that person's a firefighter, right? And forget firefighter, right? I'm going to go into the forestry services here. They're a smoke jumper, right? They're the one that you always call to parachute into the bad stuff, right? Hey, that person, right, is probably represents some level of key man risk for your org. But it's, I talk to folks and oh, Jake, we'll solve. Shaul, have you ever heard this? Where they're like, we're going to solve the key man risk problem, and I'm like, like without budget, and I mean significant budget, you just can't. There's no easy way to solve it. Have you ever bumped into anybody like, we'll just solve this?
With the key man risk, I haven't met someone, I think, that was what's the word? No, people are realistic mostly, and they know that they have that limitation. What I do notice is that it also exists in MSSPs. You also have the key man risk in the MSSP. It's just another security team that you hire. Yeah.
No, that's definitely a thing, right? And we've seen that repeatedly. And I was actually going to mention just a quick war story here on key man risk. we was working on an incident here. It's been about 18 months ago, but actually, I guess a little longer than that. Where they had lost basically the team had lost a key escalation point in their organization, right? So they were a security team of, I want to say 6 or 7. They had an MDR, MDR service. MDR escalated an alert to them. The person who had been handling that for the last couple of years had departed the organization a month prior, and they did not. The rest of the team members didn't understand how to really address that escalation. It was obvious precursor to ransomware. An obvious threat actor in the network, right? This isn't just commodity malware kind of alarm. And the alert represented that, right? Like, it was very clear, like the escalation was like, and you need to address this, right? We can't take the system offline, kind of back to our point originally, right? And again, these folks are just like, I don't really know what I'm looking at. And they closed the ticket. And a month later, right? I guess a month, 3.5 weeks later, right? After that alarm, it's a full lockup of the environment, double extortion ransomware event. It was just bad for the org. And then, of course, going back and doing root cause analysis and seeing that, it was like, oh, so sad. So
that's the problem. That I think is a great example of the fact that you get that initial triage, but you need to take care of that. And usually, if you don't have the team to triage, most likely you won't have the team to handle escalations as well, or it will be severely limited.
Right.
So yeah, it's a very common case.
Yeah, and something we might talk about here too, and just mention, right, is that the teams that, the folks with small, or the organizations with these small security teams that have trouble, contextualizing these escalations, they also have small IT teams, right? And so, whereas in a larger organization, it's easier for me to turn around and say, hey, IT team of 300 people, go reload that server, right? Hey, IT team of 1.5 people, kind of thing there, right? I've got a full-time and a part-time. I'm going to need you to rebuild that server. Oh, by the way, I know you didn't build it the first time. Good luck with that, kind of thing. And so we end up with, even the escalations themselves. Like, I need additional context, right, to be able to go cost justify this, what is effectively now a business interrupting event, as opposed to just a normal piece of business there. And that's why this context and building additional context around an alert for those escalations matters so much, right? When you hear us talk about escalations, understand, of course, we mean investigating and contextualizing, what was thrown over the wall in the first place, either by the MDR or just, maybe my EDR solution, generated that alert. At the end of the day, I still have to figure out what to do with that, right? So.
Exactly, and I think context is the key word here. That is missing usually, because I think we spoke about it in the last webinar we did together. There's no lack of detection in cybersecurity. You get many alerts and good ones at that, accurate ones. Of course, false positives happen and it's known, but you also get alerts for the real stuff. But the context there is severely lacking, because you know that something suspicious happened, but usually not much more than that. And then the correlation and investigation between endpoint logs and network logs and other events and files, and it's never ending. So that context, I think, is what people are looking for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is. So I might, I'm going to, sidetrack for 30 seconds here and note that, I couldn't agree with you more there, right? And like you mentioned, we've talked about this in the past, but I think it's worth bringing back up here. It's the difference between a level 1 analyst and a level, the big differences, right, between a level 1 analyst and, let's say, a level 3 SOC analyst. Yes, they have a couple more investigative skills, right? I don't want to downplay that, right? But the biggest difference that we see, right, is that experience, right, to contextualize, to look and say, I've seen that before. I know what that is, right? I know the last time we saw this, this is how we handled it. And I know why we handled it that way the last time we saw it. And that's the difference, right? And so if we can give our more junior analysts that context quicker, right, we're effectively accelerating them up that, basically up that path, and providing them with data that otherwise they may not even known to look for, let alone known how to get it, right? So, yeah. Next slide. So why do some teams outsource, right? This is an economy of scale, All right, we already talked about this earlier. Even big teams have a hard time with justifying 24/7 because look, there aren't that many alarms off hours. In a typical organization, the majority of your alarms occur when the majority of your users are working. This shouldn't be rocket science. That's when more stuff is happening on the network, right? This is law, this mathematical issue here in most cases. And of course, MDR can share that same human cost, right? Because again, as we mentioned, analysts end up being the biggest cost in any security monitoring. MDR can share that human cost over many clients. They make that cost more manageable. And so most teams that outsource security monitoring purely as a cost issue. I have, and I mean this, I have never talked to a CISO who's been like, you know what I want to do? All things being equal, I've got the budget to do it, right? I could do it in-house, but I totally want to outsource because I want to outsource. Like nobody wants to give up that control. That's always a concern, right? The folks that are outsourcing, they're outsourcing primarily for budget, right? Budget, and then likewise, look, even if you have unlimited budget, right, and you can afford to outsource, I'm going to tell you, man, SOC burnout is a thing, and you want to burn somebody out really, really quickly. Make them work nights. And then don't give them anything to do at night, because that's what's happening in a lot of these organizations. Because think about it, if you've ever used an MDR service, there are times you come in the morning and you've got the overnight email where it's like 0 alarms, right? If that's your analyst, right, they sat there for 12, 14, whatever the off hour time is, right? And twiddled thumbs. And again, this is just, or you gave them busy work to do, right? Which is, again, this is not a great way to retain people. It's certainly not a way to grow people. And again, you don't have any mentoring going on there because typically they're one-off anyway. And so again, Shaul, I'll pitch this to you here, man. Yeah.
Yeah, during the night, weekends, go ahead and hunt, right?
Well, that's
when you don't really have the tools.
Though. Yeah, see, that's it, right? Because you and I, we're like, heck yeah, you can give me that time, we're to go hunt, right? We've got that experience to do that, right? That the person that you're staffing overnight, over the weekend, over the whatever, even if you tell them to go hunt, and even if you somehow have the right tools to go hunt, you might as well have been arming them, with a slingshot against a grizzly bear, right? Again, it's, oh man, I just did that in the moment, and I just thought about like slingshotting Fancy Bear or something. Again, you're not going to take them out. Let's be real about this. So yeah, totally, man. It's boring to the end, for your average SOC analyst trying to do that. Again, this makes it for a great time to look at outsourcing. So next slide here and talk about why some teams don't outsource, right? So even when you share the costs across clients, MDR service can be cost prohibitive for small organizations. Again, as someone who's owned an MSSP, I've had some of these very difficult conversations where they're like, here's my budget, how do I do 24/7 monitoring? And I'm like, you don't, right? Any more than like walking into a car dealership and being like, here's the amount of money I have, I want to drive off the lot with that sports car. And they're like, yeah, no. And so, it's like, I'll put you in a car. It's just not the car you thought you were going to get, right? Kind of thing. And so MDR service can be cost prohibitive, right? I want to be super clear here. When we said that it is a cost savings over staffing 24/7, which is just uber expensive, right? It is not cheap, right? Please do not align those two things in your head. MDR is not cheap. A lot of teams think we can do it ourselves. Some think they can even do it better, right? This is a level of bravado that I know Shaul's seen before, and I'll pitch here. And then leadership may have a trust issue. They can say, well, we're not sending our data to this third party because we're giving up that trust. And then typically we'll see a little bit more of that, like, we can do it better kind of feel in house. You want to speak a little bit to this, Shaul?
Yeah, that in the past few years, supply chain has become more than a buzzword, and adding another team and an outside team working with other clients, of course, is scary to many organizations. I don't think it's very different than using the vendors of the monitoring solutions. They also get your data, but when it's people handling it, getting access, people are more vulnerable than the solutions themselves. So yeah, people try to avoid it, but it's just impossible.
Yeah, and I think maybe worth mentioning here too that this is not it's not a risk that is completely unreal here, right? If it's just monitoring, it's one thing, right? I say unreal, but not realistic. If it's just monitoring, it's one thing. You get my data, right? But when we talk MDR, the R, managed detection and response, right? The response requires some level of access to my systems. Most of my EDR systems today, have shell access, right? Most of my MDR services want that shell access, right? So I can pop a shell as system, right, on any Windows system or as root on any Linux system. And that's, I mean, if we start looking at, you mentioned supply chain, we've seen a lot of MSP-based, managed service provider-based compromises. A lot of these managed service providers do run MDR service. And so I'm not going to say the word Kaseya, right? I would never mention Kaseya, right? If we were talking about large-scale managed service provider supply chain issues, right? But if you were to think of one, that might come to mind, right? So,
but then also, if you don't allow that access, then again you're stuck with the triage only flow, which is very limiting.
No, that's it, right? And so and this is a conversation, man, that I've had dozens of times with prospective clients, right? When I was running an MDR service myself, and it was like, we're not giving you that access. And I'm like, that's fine. That's a decision that you are free to make, but understand the repercussions of that decision, right? That means that again, to Shaul's point, I'm then in monitor only mode. I can pitch stuff across the wall. I cannot assist in stopping. And I mentioned before, right? Like if I see a threat actor performing lateral movement, right? And I see them moving from machine A to machine B, right? I have agents on both, right? I can isolate both of those machines from the network so they don't hop again, right? If I have response capabilities, right? But if I don't, right, then I'm going to pitch it across the wall and hopefully you answer that in time and come in and do it yourself, right? And know what to do, by the way, right? Let's throw that one out there too, right? And understand the context of how important it is to move quickly before they laterally move again into something even more critical, right? So yeah.
Did you, just by the way, did you have any clients asking you to come physically to respond to an incident?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we also ran an incident response team. So it was the incident response, the MDR service was born out of incident response in my particular case. So we were already doing a lot of that on-site stuff and had folks asking us like, how do we do this? We at the time it was there were a lot fewer quality MDR vendors in the space. And so we stood up our own basically to augment our incident response teams.
Definitely. So, I think it's also very relevant to the next slide when we discuss what are MDRs, that, when people say incident response, sometimes people think about it in the classic way of you come to my company, you take a memory dump, you investigate, and some people talk about detection response, live through a live connection. So it's also very difficult there.
Yeah, and that's a great point here, right? It does pivot directly onto the slide, right, where it is difficult to get apples to apples comparisons of MDR offerings. It's almost like somebody saying, Jake, I'll sell you a car. My first question is what car, what condition, right? Those kind of things, because a car is not a car is not a car. And same thing goes for MDR, right? Price typically ends up being that main comparison point that I see or that I see people talk about. But I mean, again, it's very difficult to say, because you could say, well, Jake, this car is $1,000 and this other car is $10,000, right? The $1,000 car is the better deal, right? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have enough information to make that decision. So as we talk about MDR, right, be very, very clear about what you are and very, very importantly, are not getting, right, from your MDR service. We've got a big list here. I'm not going to read all these off, but one big one that it's so sad. I see this again and again and again. It's that web server monitoring, right? You've got that external point of presence. It is, I see Shaul a lot, smiling here like, yep, seen this, right, kind of thing. But folks will say, oh, well, don't worry, we've got EDR on, most of our endpoints and a few of our servers. But for performance reasons, IT has removed the EDR agent from the web server. Nobody's monitoring the web server logs, right? This thing sits on-prem, right? We're in a VPC, right, virtual private cloud, in your Azure or AWS deployment. And again, like nobody is monitoring this, right? So a threat actor is just hammering away, it's dropped a web shell. The first time you're seeing these, if you see them at all, is when they're laterally moving onto one of your endpoints that has EDR enabled, right? And so this is one of these spots where I always challenge folks, right, to come back and say, like, make sure you understand critically what is not being covered by your MDR service. I'm much more concerned about what not than what is, right? So
exactly, and also, like, if you don't have full visibility, it's not just that you don't detect the initial infection, it's that after you detect it somewhere, you can't really find the traces. You can't really know where it came from, so you can't close the gap.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, right? The investigation becomes becomes more difficult, and so a lot of the teams then, so they get that escalation, right? So I want to throw out this not hypothetical MDR situation. You get that alert, you kick it over the wall. Even the MDR, the best MDR team out there can't hunt, can't trace back, can't investigate data they don't have. And so now they're escalating this to a team that barely understands what basically the alert that we sent them, let alone how to move into other pieces of the org where they don't have that data. Again, this context, then being able to provide them with maximal context, right, with that first alert becomes so much more critical, right? Because it's going to color everything that they're going to do from again, you're going to form a first impression as an analyst when you see that alert. How serious is this? What do I think I need to do? How, if at all, am I going to proceed with that investigation? Context ends up being king. So next slide. So staff churn is a challenge for security teams. Shaul, you mentioned this already. The key man risk exists in MDR as well. I highlighted this here. MDRs typically have a little bit more staff than you do from a security standpoint, right? And so they can weather that staff churn a little bit more easily, but they feel this pain. Trust me, again, I speak from experience here. We still feel that pain. Technology changes at an MSP. They may be on one technology stack and then move to another technology stack, right? Because somebody gave them a better deal. My folks, this is not a high margin business. Let me tell you that, right? So when another vendor comes along and my contract is up with vendor one, and vendor two is like, Jake, come on, man, like, we'll give it to you free for the first 6 months kind of thing. If you sign a 2-year deal with me, like, we're done. Like, that's absolutely going to happen. And my customers are going to be changing the technology stack, right? Who's that burden on? Right? You.
Yeah,
right?
and also if you decide to change the provider,
yes,
they will have another technology stack as well. And usually, the provider comes with their solutions. There are providers that use your internal solutions, but it really, really, differs between the teams. Exactly.
And oh, buddy, are they expensive, right? When you are doing bespoke, I mean, I can speak again from direct experience here. I've priced it as a VC. So, and then separately, I've offered the bespoke. We will work with your security stack solutions. One of the problems for me that ends up being much more expensive because it creates staffing challenges for me, right? Because now instead of needing to have people that are familiar with exactly one technology stack, mine, now I have to have people that are familiar with your technology stack as well, any hours that you need coverage for, right? And so because it creates staffing challenges for me, I have to charge more for it. One other point to mention, Shaul noted that if you change MDR providers, you have to change your technology stack in the vast majority of circumstances. This is true even if you wanted to stay on, let's say, and we're not going to throw vendor names out here, but let's say that you wanted to stay on whatever your EDR platform is. If you are working with that MDR, it is highly likely that the licenses that you have for that, for that EDR solution are tied to that MDR service, meaning you are purchasing them through them in a monthly reseller agreement, right? And so even if you're like, but it's already installed, I just want to keep these, right? Like, it's not even an option in most cases to do that, right? So even as you move to that next, even changing over to another MDR vendor that uses, let's say, the same EDR solution, it's still a giant pain to go through and effectively rehome where those agents are pointing to. It's such a challenge that I've seen folks just say, throw their hands up and be like, nope, that's it. We're going to uninstall, reinstall kind of thing. So this is a not insignificant cost as well. And it's something you should think about. I think about it just like getting into a major relationship, right? Moving in with a girlfriend or something, right? It's something you want to consider very carefully because there are high exit costs as well, right? Any thoughts around the show?
Oh, I'm getting married next month, so I think I chose very well. But yeah, I agree completely with everything you said. You're putting most of the eggs in that basket
Yeah.
when you choose the provider. And if you need to change the entire stack, it's really untenable in those situations.
Yeah. Well, hey, first off, congratulations on getting married next month. That's fantastic. And I'm not worried about your high exit costs the way I am about getting locked in with an MDR. So next slide. And so I'll wrap up a couple of thoughts here, and then Shaul is going to demo some or show you kind of what we're talking about here, because we've talked a lot about in the abstract around context, but we want to show you what this looks like, right? I do want to wrap up here though with a couple of thoughts. Choosing to insource or outsource security isn't a straightforward question to answer. I get asked this a lot. Hey, Jake, what do you think I should do? And I have to say, even like I need context, right? And they're like, well, give me details, and folks will be like, okay. And I'm like, hold on, like you can't give me 5 minutes of details for me to be able to make a good judgment here for what's best for you, right? Like this is something you really need to understand a lot about your environment. And so if you feel like this is an easy question to answer, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that there are probably things you haven't yet thought about, right? Along that point, right? So I'll also mention that a lot of folks anchor on, well, this other business that looks a lot like us, they did X, Y, or Z, right? Well, that's neat, but again, they are in a different circumstance than you are, right? And very realistically, are operating differently, and so you don't know necessarily all of the drivers that led them to that decision. And so if any of those drivers are different in your organization, there you go. All right. And so I'll also close here with technology can absolutely, and this is where Shaul is going to demo for us, can help close those talent gaps that are going to leave smaller organizations with way too much key man risk. So Shaul, I want to kick it over to you here to go through a couple of slides and do a demo for us.
Let's do it. Time really flies when we do these webcasts. So how does Intezer fit into the picture? If people don't know, Intezer is a company founded over 6 years ago, and we focus on incident response, malware analysis, forensics solutions in as much as automated way as possible. So we can ingest different types of artifacts and provide clear verdicts and threat intelligence data. Usually we see different solutions in these different stages of investigation. So you have your sandbox for this kind of file, and your sandbox for network artifacts, and a different threat intelligence provider, and there's a lot of fragmentation in that process. And as we spoke about when discussing the key man risk, there needs to be that organizational memory so you can compare and identify connections between these different investigations that you carry out. So what we do is we can ingest these artifacts and alerts from different alerting sources like EDRs, email gateways, phishing mailboxes, etc., and analyze the artifacts to determine whether they are legitimate or not, what is the level of risk, of course, by identifying reused artifacts, elements, techniques, code, using our technology. So in the end, you get that additional triage and investigation, and using that information, of course, you can make your decisions. So just to explain how that really happens, we've broken down the challenges that incident response teams have to 4 main pillars. So you have the alert triage part, which is now usually, as we discussed, is taken care of by external teams, where you need to actually investigate each alert and incident and make a decision. And that decision needs to inform, what you do with it. So do you escalate, do you investigate further, or do you close it as a false positive? The response requires that information that you have from triage, and also the ability to identify the techniques or persistence mechanisms that were taken by that threat in order to properly remediate and not do a clean wipe of the machine every time. So you also learn from that investigation. Of course, hunting is an inseparable part of incident response, but usually it is completely disregarded. It's considered too advanced or not necessary every time. But if you don't hunt, you might miss the spread of the infection. Usually, you might get the alert for the initial patient 0, but then you have to make sure that it did not spread across the organization. And lastly, and this is very important and relevant to what we discussed, knowledge retention. That data that you learn and collect from each investigation needs to be then utilized and reused in every new investigation. If I've seen this before, I need to already know how to respond to it. So I'll show how that actually works. I know that this is completely in the air now. So let me share the screen here. So as I mentioned, the way we actually automate security operations in this way is through connecting to alerting sources. I mentioned also that there's no lack of alerting and detection capabilities, but there is a lack in the investigation and triage part, of course. So here you can see our solution, and in this case, I'm connected to Sentinel-1 EDR. We can connect to a variety of EDRs and to XOR as well. And again, we can connect to different SOAR solutions. SOAR is excellent in these kinds of flows because it's really, it elevates the capability of connecting to other less common alerting sources. The data that we,
Can I jump in here for a second? You mentioned SOAR, right? But I do want to highlight, right, that SOAR can only automate, it can only make decisions on data it has, and data enrichment platforms like this tremendously, I know this is where you're going with this, but I want to make sure we don't lose the forest for trees, tremendously expand what you can do with SOAR, right, by generating more trigger events, right, by giving more data in the first place to SOAR. Sorry, man, I just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, exactly. People think that SOAR can immediately solve all their problems, but it just automates. So it's a huge enabler if you have good solutions and good data. But if you don't have the data, an automated flow can't really make the decision. You need deterministic data in order to clearly make a decision, because in the end, it's a decision tree, and you need a clear yes or no in those cases. So you can see here that from the artifacts and alerts that we ingest, we automatically triage them. So that could be files, hashes, URLs, endpoint scans that we run, and we provide a clear verdict in these cases. So this is data from one of our clients. Of course, I can't share who, but you can see that from the information we collect, over 50% of the alerts end up as being trusted. So that means they're false positives. And that's very common. Again, if you detect based on behavior, you're bound to have false positives. It's not a bug. That's just how that works. But then, of course, you can focus on the real threats and see that it's only a small portion of the overall alert. So already you have less stuff to take care of, which you can manage with a smaller team. We also classify threats. So it's not enough to know that something is malicious. You need to understand what threat this is. And this is something we can do based on reused artifact or code, because if the same technique is being used as an experienced analyst would know, we will be able also to identify that reuse of that technique, of that sequence of code, so we can match that and classify the threat to a specific actor or group. So based on that, you can also, of course, understand what kind of threats are targeting your organization. And if something is repeated, there might be still a hole that is open for them to access through. So that's just in from a high view, and let's see how that works in the day-to-day of the analyst. So I'm jumping here to Sentinel-1 again. This is just one example. It's an excellent tool, but this can work with many other EDRs. And I have here 3 alerts that I need to take care of. Now, all of them are classified as malware or ransomware. So I do need to investigate and triage that properly. To make a decision, I can't escalate everything. And most likely not everything is really malicious. So let's see the lack of context that I mentioned. And again, this is not unique to this solution. I have here an alert based on behavioral detection. It classifies as malware. I see some information, metadata about the file, the path, and information about the publisher, and some info on the endpoint. I have here threat indicators that don't tell me much. So in this case, I see that it could become persistent, but I don't know where it installs itself. So it doesn't really provide as much context as I need. In this case, in a real scenario, I would need to collect more logs from the endpoint, or practically, run a forensic investigation, which rarely happens. So what we provide as part of our connection is that automatic triage. So we receive the hash or the file from this specific incident, that's this jump cloud installer. We analyze it statically and dynamically using our technology. In this case, based on code reuse from this legitimate vendor, we could make a decision that this is a likely false positive related to jump cloud. Again, this is a software vendor which is known and legitimate. So the recommendation will be resolve as a false positive, go ahead with your day. So that's a first example of automatic triage. Instead of the MDR doing this, you simply can do it in an automated fashion and just go over it. Some cases are not this clear cut. So in this case, I have a ransomware detection. And again, many different software can act in a suspicious way, and which resembles ransomware, like deleting shadow copies. That's very common for ransomware, but backup solutions also might do it. In this case, instead of ransomware, I actually get a classification of an administration tool related to Monero. So it's not legit, I would say, but it really depends on your company policy. If you're a crypto company, maybe. And it might be something that someone just installed on their machine to make some money on the side, or it might be a miner. You need to investigate this, but it's not ransomware. So the severity or urgency, of course, is reflected here. Now, lastly, in a case where you really have malware, let's see the complete flow. Again, I have a very similar alert. I can't really discern the level of threat here, but luckily I have this confirmation from Intezer. So this is confirmed, malicious, related to NJ-RAT. Now, again, we classify the threat because it's important to know this is a rat, what type of rat, and understanding the capabilities. Now here also, I see that I know it has evasion techniques, I know it has persistence, but now I will dive into the analysis and see how we can actually know where it installed itself, what it did, how can I hunt for it as an analyst. So here I can just jump into the analysis. And this is where you see our system, how it looks like for a file analysis. In this case, again, I can correlate this. I see the path of the file, any command line arguments, if they exist, and I see how the file executes on our side. First, we can read about this threat and understand what kind of threat this is. Is this relevant? Maybe it's something rather old, maybe it's targeted or not. So I can have all of that information. In addition, I can jump to the TTP section here to see some techniques and capabilities that we see based on the behavioral analysis of the file. So we asked about persistence, which I think is one of the most important things in response. I can see exactly where this malware installs itself. So as an analyst, it's very simple to go there and delete those persistence points and verify, of course, that the malware does not return. In addition, I can see that it, for example, can sniff keystrokes. So I would advise the users to change their passwords and any private information. Now, after I know this and I can respond, as I mentioned before, hunting is a critical part of any response process because I need to verify that the malware didn't spread elsewhere. So we collect all of the behavioral information in this case, but of course, not every registry key that is touched is relevant for further detection. Most of them are legit. So again, based on reuse, that is the overall concept here, we know that attackers always reuse their techniques, their infrastructure, their code. So we can also identify reuse of techniques of different network artifacts, behavioral artifacts that you can see here under detect and hunt. So I know that these network artifacts or command lines were seen previously in NJRAT. And we can remove all of the ones that we've seen in legitimate software. So you can save time on false positives. So the next step would be choosing the artifacts that I want to use for further detection, and then of course carrying on with hunting. So I can choose here, for example, this DNS and IP, and click here on extract rule Sentinel-1. This is a very new feature, so I'll tell you about what it does now and what it's going to do. So first, let me just show you how that rule looks like. So this is it. We have the rule here, DNS request. This is the Sentinel-1 query structure. I can copy this, of course, to Sentinel-1, deep visibility in that case, and carry on the hunting procedure. So let's go back, hunt now, and I can run the query. Now, obviously, this is not fully automated. As you see, the goal of the feature, which was released, I think, last week, is to immediately and automatically run the query. So you can already know whether there are other infections or it's limited to that host. So again, hunting is not that difficult. Most EDRs today provide you with hunting capabilities for what they can see. So it must be part of your response process. So that is the overall process for a file. Of course, there are other elements to investigation. Into triage, we can analyze network artifacts, we can analyze whole endpoints. So in case where you need that full endpoint triage, you can do that also automatically or on demand. And I'm also happy to show some examples on email alert triage. But Jake, do you have anything to add?
No, this is fantastic. We're bumping up on the top of our hour here, and of course, the copy of the slides and reporting will be available at the available for viewing probably by tomorrow here. But yeah, if you want to if you've got any like quick example here in the next 2 minutes, you want to wrap up. But otherwise, and this is fantastic, and I see how this is going to be a game changer for so many security teams. That query language alone is just mind blowing.
Awesome. So, and the goal there, of course, is also to support different languages dedicated to EDR and also more generic languages like Sigma or OS Query. Now, as you mentioned, of course, I've been logged out. So I think we can skip that, but essentially through different playbooks that we can provide through different source solutions, we can also support email triage. So all we need to get is that email, any attached files, any URLs, we can analyze that and return a result. So, EDRs and emails being the most common alert source and false positive source that can already cover most of the security operations stack that teams need.
Man, that's fantastic. I remember the first time I saw your pyramid, basically pyramid of IOCs, right? So your efficacy there. What's the behavioral IOC, effectiveness, and being able to remove, all of this stuff that's background noise. I mean, that immediately was a game changer to me. I remember thinking then, like, this is gonna, first off, this is amazing, and it's only getting better from here. And every time we reconnect and I see it again, there's something new here, and I'm blown away. I'm just blown away. So
thanks, man.
You're going to put MDR, you're going to put some number of MDR analysts out of a job. That's not a bad thing, by the way. There are lots of open cybersecurity jobs, so lots of need there, but fantastic, Shaul. So, well, hey, folks, I think this brings us to the top of our hour here. I want to thank, obviously, Shaul and Inazur for sponsoring this content and bringing this to the SANS community. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this today. I know I certainly have. Thank you, Shaul, for this great back and forth conversation. And folks, I hope to see you at the next SANS webcast. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jake.
Alrighty, I'll go ahead and stop the webcast here. Let's see.